Welcome to the Critical Media Studies Podcast. We're your hosts, Mike Rapici
and Barry Falk.
Hello, Michael. How are you this evening?
Hi, Barry. Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Welcome, everyone, to the latest episode of Critical Media Studies Podcast. We're about to enter our respective spring breaks. Not that that really has anything to do with the content of this particular program, which is about we're returning to a friend. Many of our friends, have you noticed this, Michael? Many of the friends of the program were involved in some way in World War II.
Well,
what does that mean about our friends? I don't know what it means. Are we mourning or somehow affiliated with the so-called greatest generation? I don't know, but actually, let me say this. Let me say this very quickly, because this may actually be. I know I'm digressing already, but I think it might be worth saying. I don't think that's actually a coincidence. I think there is a sad and somewhat scary reason why we tend to be attracted to
thinkers around that time.
Yeah, thinkers around that era, because I think there is something about 1930s politics, and a lot of the essays that we're reading are not just media related. This particular one, I mean, we'll have to think about the conversation that might be had between this text and media. But certainly we're talking about texts that, if not directly, this one directly does it, but if not directly, they indirectly talk about 30s politics and the situation of encroaching war or imminent war or wartime. And I'm afraid that might be one of the reasons why we seem naturally attracted to these texts in 2026. I won't say any more. I'll
take
disagree?
Well, no, I don't necessarily disagree, but I think that the other thing about it is that, we are smack in the middle right now in 2026 of an era of incredible technological change and sort of reimagining of communication and
Sure.
how we implement all of these various technologies into our world, right? I mean, we spend the majority of our time talking in some capacity about the internet, the algorithms that govern the internet.
Right.
And I think that if you look at the 30s, 40s, 50s, even the 60s, this is similarly, the rise of a lot of the modern technologies that we're now moving away from were coming into the forefront. So I don't know that it's necessary. I mean, I think that certainly, the specter of war hangs over it. Unfortunately, that's a, sort of an indisputable historical fact, but I don't necessarily know that we're driven.
Well, there is a covert. Okay, I totally agree with your point, but there is a covert, as we know from this particular moment in history, there's a covert connection between military efforts and media, in that most of the media that we're talking about now had its origin in wartime. Wartime exigencies, or were developed for military purposes. And right now, we're conducting a war that is primarily driven by smart technology, or rather, that's one of the new components of this. So there is a way in which you say technology, I say, you say media, and I say technology, or rather, I say wartime. And we're both right, I'm afraid. Let's get the book. Oh, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
No. I was going to say, I don't think you have to look far to find war. Unfortunately, I think that's
everywhere.
It's sort of one of our,
our things,
sad realities.
Well, speaking about war and possibly technology, let's talk about the tech, shall we? Let's not divert anymore. Dr. Falk. No, we're going to get right to it. So tonight, we're both very excited. We're returning to, this is why I digress, we're returning to a text by one of the friends of the program, Simone Weil, the great French writer on theological topics, political topics. And recently, her theories about attention have sort of come up more and more. They've sort of arisen in prominence, mainly thanks, I think, to Byung-Chul Han, that she's become a sort of thing among media studies circles. But we're going to talk about a text that was written near the end of her life. And it's called On the Abolition of All Political Parties. That all is very important and kind of characteristic of Vey, because
Yeah.
Vey doesn't really do things in a halfway measure. I mean, she doesn't really do a halfway
She
measure.
commits. She commits. As the kids like to say, it's full send. She is.
What did the kids say?
It
I
is a
don't know that word.
full send. She's
Full
going,
send.
and there's nothing held back. It's funny. I don't even know if the kids say that or not, but it's astonishing to think that she died at 34. To think of what an astounding heavyweight, excuse me, she would have been if she had had a full life. I mean,
Yeah. I think even another 10, 15 years, she was poised. Because here's something that I learned from the text I'm about to read, this note on the text. Did it register with you, Michael? She published nothing until she died. It was only after she died that her work came out. Thanks to certain people, thanks to, of all people, André Breton, who has nothing in common ideologically with Simone Weil, and also her philosopher friend, her former philosophy teacher, Alain, I think is how you pronounce it. They kind of brought everything into print.
I didn't know that, but at the same time, I don't know that it's surprising to me, because you got to think that if she was in the public eye with this, she would have almost certainly had to spend a lot of energy defending it, because as we said, there is no side taking here. It's like she is committed to this vision that she has. I'll tell you, it's been quite some time since I've used the phrase, or we've used the phrase, full of beans about a discussion. I am full of beans about this discussion. I am. And I think that it's a good thing in a way that all of this was posthumous, because this would have ruffled all the feathers, all the feathers. Which perversely could have been this weirdly unifying thing. Like everybody could have rallied around their annoyance at her commitment here.
But my take on that is that part of the immense freedom with which she expresses herself comes from the fact that there's no publicity
she can speak freely.
She can speak freely, and this is kind of what she talks about in this short essay, that obviously what's important to her is freedom of speech, and freedom of thought. And it's really on that foundation that she will make her comments toward the abolition of all political parties. Michael, why don't I tell you a little bit more and listen?
That was a smooth segue into the text. I just want you to know that was well done.
Thank you. I'm glad you appreciate it. But trust me, out there in Radio Land, they don't care. They're thinking, what the hell are you guys talking about? Well, dear listener, I'm going to tell you a little bit more and give you a little bit more context on this particular text. And this is, I think, an important bit of biographical context. So, toward the abolition of all political parties, on the abolition of all political parties, was written in 1943 at the very end of Simone Weil's tragically short life. We are told, and I'm going to mention this particular edition, it's because it's so beautiful. It is, of course, like all their books, all the New York Review books, it is just this great cover, very handy to hold, fits in the hand well, and NYRB books. We're talking about a translation from the French. The essay is translated from the French by Simon Leys, probably, and it has a wonderful, incredibly informative and provocative and insightful in all sorts of ways, not surprisingly, by when one considers the author. A concluding essay that's kind of a biographical essay, really, by the Nobel Prize winning poet Czesław Miłosz. Okay, so back to that. A note toward the on the abolition of all political parties was written in 1943 at the end of Weil's tragically short life. She was in London, where she had rallied. And I think the biographical details give you something about the form and content of this essay. That's why I'm reading it. She was in London, where she had rallied the Free French around General de Gaulle. She was deeply dismayed by various attempts of French politicians in exile to revive the old and destructive practices of party politics, which of course she rails about in this particular essay. To revive the old and destructive practices of party politics, rivalries, and factionalism. Finally, as a matter of principle, not surprisingly again from Simone Weil, she resigned from all her duties with the Free French on 26th of July. She was already in hospital. And one of the reasons they don't mention it, but one of the reasons that she was in the hospital is that she was in kind of a hunger strike for French workers who were, starving or deprived during the war. She was already in hospital, or actually it may have been British workers. I think it was British workers who were being bombed during the wars. Like wherever she goes, she sort of feels this tremendous need to sympathize and, to rally and find kind of and to support a new beleaguered community. She was already in hospital, where she died shortly afterwards, as you mentioned, at age 34. So, any comments on this, or shall we just continue?
I feel
in the essay.
I think the key takeaway from this, right, is that she was deeply dismayed by various attempts of French politicians to revive old and destructive practices of party politics. That is what we are going to talk about here.
And in this, no, I think that's right. We better mention that obviously the revival that she saw of party factionalism, even among her core sympathy, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's a group that she's deeply sympathetic to, right? It's not collaborationist France, it's rebellion, it's resistance France, but they're in England. And here you would think it's got to be, and not only is she sympathetic to them, you would think that she would feel the imperative to show solidarity with the French in exile, but not Simone Weil. And indeed, when she sees the flarings of political partisanship, she sticks to the principles articulated in the essay that we're about to talk about and resigns.
I think let's jump into this, because there's so many sort of little tangents and side discussions I want to go down, but I think we're probably best served to have them all in some order, in relation to the text. So shall we jump into the text itself?
I'm doing it immediately. I'm moving to page 16 in this wonderful edition. Political parties or organizations that are publicly, Simone Weil writes, political parties are organizations that are publicly and officially designed for the, don't hold back, Simone. Political parties are designed for the purpose of killing in all souls the sense of truth and of justice. Don't hold back. Don't hold back. The collective pressure is exerted upon a wide public by the means of propaganda. The avowed purpose of propaganda is not to impart light, but to persuade. Immediately, she shifts to Hitler. Hitler saw very clearly that the sum of propaganda must always be to enslave minds. Speaking of media, maybe this is a place to bring in media. One thing, I don't know if we talked about this in our myriad times of talking about the Third Reich on critical media studies, but did we mention the fact that they had not only an incredibly detailed and up-to-date, well, obviously the Third Reich took the idea of radio and communication by radio seriously, but they were actually the avant-garde in the world in television technology. No,
see, I think we've talked.
So media. When she's talking about propaganda, we are in media here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the contemporary sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did you want to say something?
No. I definitely, but let's finish with this section, then we'll.
Okay. Hitler saw very clearly that the aim of propaganda must always be to enslave minds through medias, I guess what we're
Right.
saying. You could add. All political parties make propaganda. A party that would not do so would disappear, and all its competitors practice it. All parties confess that they make propaganda, however mendacious they may be. None is bold enough to pretend that in doing so is merely educating the public and informing people's judgment. In other words, moving people toward an appreciation of the truth. So you have a stark counter, a stark opposition in Bay's terms between truth and means of persuading or inclining the mind toward truth. And what she sees is the goal, inevitable goal of all political parties, including the media, and therefore the goal of any media apparatus mobilized by a party, which is purely to manipulate persons' judgments to produce propaganda for a single cause. Comments, yes. Or do we want to add?
I think let's just do this last 2 or 3 sentences that she has here.
Please.
And then we take the whole chunk, I think. So she says political parties do profess, it's true, to educate those who come to them, supporters, young people, new members. But this is a lie. It is not an education. It is a conditioning, a preparation for the far more rigorous ideological control imposed by the party upon its members. Okay,
she's holding back.
So Simone Weil comes out absolutely swinging. And so I got a couple, just to sort of summarize this, and then a question, right? So she basically says, right, so propaganda.
Michael, you're scaring me with that.
I'm ready.
Here.
I'll tell you, full beans, Barry.
Let's do it.
So
I'm going to be up for it. I'm rising to the occasion.
She's pretty clear about this, right? Propaganda is a tool that political parties use. We are open about it, right? And though they may frame it as some sort of education, the entire purpose of propaganda is to, as she says, the avowed purpose of propaganda is not to impart light, but to persuade, right? That we are, that propaganda is a tool used to bring people into a certain ideological alignment. Okay. And everybody does this. It's not an education. This is, she says, it is a conditioning, a preparation for the far more rigorous ideological control imposed by the party upon its members. So read not too deeply between the lines here. The purpose of the political party is ideological control. And according to her, all parties, regardless of your ideology, essentially function in the same way.
Absolutely.
So she is not taking, and I think this is really important. This is sort of the brilliance of what she's doing here. She is not taking aim at a particular ideology so much as she is taking a shot at the process of ideological manipulation. Because it, as she says at the beginning, political parties are organizations that are publicly and officially designed for the purpose of killing in all souls the sense of truth and justice. So if I'm going to put these together, we're going to say that truth and justice have to exist outside of some sort of ideology, because the minute they become ideological or political, they are aligned with propaganda, which shuts down our ability to think individually, to identify truth in any capacity.
Well put. Well said.
So if we're there, my question here is, what exactly is this truth and justice that we're moving away from? Because it seems, and I think we're going to talk about this, but this idea of truth and or justice as an absolute, right? That somehow any ideology is always going to miss that truth. So there's a paradox here that I'm sort of struggling with. This idea that propaganda is problematic because it takes us away from ourselves.
Indeed.
That's fair, right? Like, so I have my thoughts, but propaganda is going to alter them or shift them to fall into some sort of alignment.
Right. Well put.
So then this idea of truth and justice, on one hand, needs to be individual or endemic to the individual in some way.
Yes, that I think is the best. When comes time for me to answer,
I'm almost done.
Go right there.
I want you to do that.
Right there. I'm going to go right to that point about the individual.
But does that mean? So there is a perspective, there is a position of truth and justice, but somehow I guess I'm saying is I'm concerned about how we can have this problem with ideology that, for reasons that she'll talk about and we'll discuss shortly, take us away from this public good, right, into alignment somewhere else. But there also has to be a position that is constant, that is truth for the public good. So I'm curious as to how it is possible that all ideologies miss the truth.
Well, Michael, I'm going to give you a provisional. I think you just asked the question of the entire episode.
Okay.
And so I'm going to give you a provisional answer, but I'm not going to feel like I'm cheating, because I think you asked a core question, and we're going to be returning to it, I think, when we take a look at the other passages that we're shortly going to take a look at. But I think your excellent question, allows me to maybe put a pin, or not put a pin, but to clarify one or two things that I was thinking about in the essay, and that it might be good to bring to our listeners' attention before we go any further. So I think of it this way, or I've been thinking about this essay, and something came up. There is something, and you were referring to it, a couple minutes ago when you were describing her critique of political parties. There is something in Simone Weil that looks really, really contemporary. Something in the way that she argues that looks very, very contemporary. And then I'm going to say, but also rather, there is something in Simone Weil in this particular essay, and in the opposition between truth and ideology that she draws, that doesn't seem very contemporary at all. And I want to just sort of flag that in a partial answer to your question. And if you and our listeners are dissatisfied, don't be too dissatisfied, because we're going to return to this very question in a slightly different modulation, I think, with a very slight modulation in every passage that we're about to
Sure.
So the partial answer. Number one, poll one. Here's where Simone really is contemporary. As you are detailing, she sounds like, instead of being a pre-Louis Althusserian, she sounds like a post-Louis Althusserian. She sounds like a true postmodern, because what she really is arguing in some of the passages, as you pointed out, what she is really arguing is something like, and I mentioned Althusser because she's kind of, without using the concept of an ideological apparatus, that's what she means.
I think, for clarity, you're talking about the state apparatuses. Can you just talk briefly about that, so that if we're listening and not familiar?
Sure. And I'll just do this briefly, is that, ideology, and I'm going to get back to the key word ideology that you use, is that, and Althusser's essay is pretty complex, but I think for our purposes and the purposes of a novice listener, the thing that I would emphasize is that Althusser believes that ideology, there are structures, spaces, sites of instruction, for example, that produce ideology, that make it ideology inescapable.
Right.
So there's a kind of spatial, so ideology isn't just a question of me saying something or trying to get you to believe something. It's actually, there's something about ideology that is structured by the particular space. That's what Althusser mentions in a couple different ways in his classic essay on ideology and ideological state apparatuses. She says pretty much the same thing about political parties, which is why, as you were pointing out, all political parties are ideological,
Right.
are committed to falsehood and committed to propaganda, because it's the very structure that's a problem. There isn't a possibility in the structuralist view, there's no possibility of stepping outside of ideology.
So
as long as you're in that space, as long as you're in that structuration, you're in ideology. That's why she wants to get outside of it, or why she wants to critique it.
Well, so let me ask you then, just to make sure that I'm in the same place here. The problem isn't a particular ideology or what we might consider a worldview.
Or a particular party. Or
right.
A particular
the problem party. Is, so the problem is not let me slow down though, because I think this is a really helpful insight. The problem isn't so much a particular ideology or way of thinking or seeing. The problem is that political parties in and of themselves generate a particular ideology, and that it is the organization of the party, the structure of the party,
right,
that is flawed. And I think, let me take a shot at your answer here, because what they create essentially is some version of groupthink, which takes us away from whatever individual thinking would be true to us.
Yeah, exactly. There is a kind of group thing. Although, that's basically it. But and I think we're going to return to this dynamic, and and we're going to talk about this opposition of truth and ideology. And I think we're going to use words like structure and form more than the content. It's going to be structures and form that replicate ideology. I think that's going to be kind of part of the argument.
Would it be fair to say, though I'm not trying to join these two different discussions, is this akin to McLuhan's "the medium is the message," that the medium, the political party, is the message, and that becomes the problem?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. And the message is ideology.
Right.
In her reckoning. Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought in McLuhan, because somebody got to.
Hey, shots all around.
Yeah, shots all around. But let me say, okay, so all that was, very startling anticipation of Althusserian arguments about ideology. And Althusser's argument kind of informs most contemporary academic, hoity-toity intellectual understandings or discourse on ideology and how it functions. Now, but I'm going to say this briefly, because again, I think we're going to return to it. And I think we should add some more passages to thicken the mix here. But I think there's also a place where Simone Weil doesn't sound like a modern at all. Not only not a contemporary or a postmodern. I don't even think she thinks like a modern or sounds very modern at all. She has an idea of truth as the absolute pure, as something that is articulated to the value of the individual. So she does one important gesture, and this is her crucial gesture, and we're going to see that again and again in the passages we're going to look at. Her crucial gesture is to make truth, as you were saying, if ideology is group-centered, truth is centered on the individual. Truth is centered in the individual. So she sutures those two ideas. Truth, in opposition to party politics, allows a kind of opening for the individual, becomes a kind of opening for truth, and truth can enter this thing. But by joining truth and the individual, and this is the part of her that I think might cause many of her contemporary readers pause, But I think we do her a an injustice if we don't state it clearly and, say not only the things that we find easy to agree with, but things that might challenge our understanding. She does believe in a truth that's outside of ideology. Once she hooks up truth to the individual, her individualized notion of truth, I think for her is completely outside of the realm of ideology, probably in a way that most of our listeners, and maybe even dear Michael Rapici, doesn't really think is possible. But I don't want to fight about that. I want to see if that comes up in the thing. I want this discussion to come up.
Yeah, I think we're gonna
Yeah.
have to return to that.
Yeah, we are going to have to return to that. Yeah.
So that's a fascinating. I think before we move on, I just really want to take a moment to appreciate that. This idea that the propaganda that these parties make, which are designed to reinforce and, propagate their ideology, this is all in a way circular as a result of the structure of the party in the first place.
I think that's her point.
That's fascinating. I love this essay.
And so it's only within the, and maybe Heidegger could be brought in. I don't know yet.
Oh, I think without question, when we get to the discussion of truth being,
let's do that. But Weil actually addresses these concerns in the passage that we're going to talk about right now. So I'll pick up from page 21. Yet how can we desire truth if we have no prior knowledge of it? This is the mystery of all mysteries. And then she tries to account for the mystery. Words that express a perfection which no mind can conceive of. God, truth, justice. Actually, we talk about truth, but really God, truth, and justice are all synonyms really for the same thing, I think, in this essay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, that inability, God, truth, and justice are alike things that she feels that we cannot properly conceive of. And so, let me start, that's my gloss of the sentence, but let me read that sentence again. Words that express a perfection which no mind can conceive of, God, truth, justice, silently evoked with desire, but without any preconception of what they mean, have the power to lift up the soul and flood it with light. It is when we desire truth with an empty soul. Note, per our previous discussion, she says we, but she means the individual, right? When the individual desires truth with an empty soul and without attempting to guess its content, it is then that we receive the light. Therein resides the entire mechanism of attention. And since attention is one of her key words, Michael, and also a key word that she uses in thinking about study and concentration about anything at all. Let me just read.
I want to interrupt you for 1 second. Sure. I want to get through this passage because I think we want to get the entire discussion up here. But it's funny because this creates a problem in the exact opposite direction for me now. Let's finish this section. We'll come back. I love this essay, Barry.
Okay, well, that's interesting. I thought it said you said it created a problem.
It does, but they're wonderful. They're wonderful thought problems here.
Oh, I love those. True attention. So I just wanted to read a little bit about where she fastens on attention, because the process of attention, of emptying out the self and allowing for something else to inhabit the self, that seems to be, so that's what she ties to attention. And that seems to be the way in which truth, the concept of the inconceivable, the truth enters into the individual subject. And according to Weil, it can enter the individual subject in a way that the structures of ideology that attend political parties cannot. So, relevant passage. True attention, she goes on to write, is a state so difficult for any human creature, so violent, that any emotional disturbance can derail it. Therefore, one must always endeavor strenuously to protect one's inner faculty of judgment against the turmoil of personal hopes and fears. A little bit later on, further on in the page. Caught in this oscillation, his attention is no longer pure. If you pay attention to party calculations, the individual's attention is, quote, no longer pure. If the complexity of the calculations demand his total attention, however, inevitably he will make many mistakes. Oh, I'm sorry. That's the bad kind of thing. If his calculations demands his total attention, inevitably he will make many mistakes, even if he happens to be very intelligent, very brave, and deeply attached to the truth. What should he do? It is simple. If he can escape from the grip of the people who wield the whip, he must run away. So this truth happens in a space cleared by the individual, and the individual has to attend to it through and attain it through a scrupulous concentration. And that's why it can't be a group activity. I can't pay attention for you.
Right. So here, I'm going to try it again. So this whole notion of truth that we're talking about, that she's talking about, right? Another word for truth is God. Another word for truth or God is justice, right? All of these fall under the umbrella of perfection for her, which is something that we cannot conceive of. This is really just, as I understand what she's saying, this is just sort of anathema to the human mind and condition. We cannot conjure this on our own. As an extension of that, necessarily, this could never be the result of politics or any other sort of ideology, because those are rooted in human structures, and we are talking about something that is larger than the human structure.
Indeed.
So we can't conceive of it. It's larger than us. It is necessarily external to us.
Mm-hmm.
So the only thing that we can really do is be quiet, be focused, and really this is sort of, and we've talked about this in the other episode that we did on Vey. This is sort of like you have to sort of be patient and meditate and wait for this to come to you, because we can't conceive of it.
That's
right. And so the
perfect.
idea, now this is, I think this is interesting. It's like we have to keep any sort of ideological urging at bay. And I think this is Heidegger. You're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong, but the sort of the analogy with the vessel and being filled, right? We have to strive to remain an empty vessel. And it's like this sort of competing urges to either be filled with propaganda on one hand, which will never be true because it comes from human conception, right? Or we have to sort of push that away and be empty to be filled with the divine, right? Which is truth. So is then the answer to the question I was asking earlier, that the reason it's individual yet still constant among all of us is because it's divine and it's just not of human creation. So this is fascinating because she argues, I think, a little further on about organized religion creating the exact same problem that political parties create.
Right.
Because which adds a little bit of depth to this, because it's not, this is independent of your intent, right?
Absolutely.
So this is back. I mean, we're back to the Garden of Eden here, right? Like once you've sort of taken a bite of that apple and have that mark on you, regardless of what you're trying to do, you still have that mark. You can't scrub that off yourself. You have to sort of wait. This is So that's it. We just sit and wait and pay
Well,
attention.
I think what you well, I'm
I don't
just
mean to
gonna
make it, I don't mean, excuse me. I want to say, I don't mean to treat that lightly or to brush it off, but it seems to me that there is no course of human action that falls outside of these ideology
right,
producing
right,
structures.
right.
And so the best we can do is try and remain these empty vessels.
I have nothing to add to that. It's not a coincidence that one of the first major collection of essays, uh, in the essay collection that I think there's been a lot of republished Weil stuff in recent years, but in the 60s and 70s, all you could find is a collection of essays called Waiting for God.
Mm-hmm.
It's exactly, I mean, that's her theme. And that this kind of passive um, waiting for the daemon, the spirit,
Right.
God. That is what she calls truth or equates with truth, justice, God. So before we scare all our listeners away, I want to say so, yes, you're right, Michael, and you described it brilliantly. I have nothing to add to that. Let me just say something to that. Let me just say something to keep our non-religious listeners listening, uh, because this also has to be added as well. That and this is also playing a part in the essay. Despite the mysticism, despite her fervent Catholicism, she remained on the side of the heretics. And in fact, in this essay, she basically said that the church is the Catholic Church she blames. This is outlined in the Czesław Miłosz essay, afterward. She blames the Catholic Church. So she is on the side of the truth and feels that truth can enter into the individual subject by exactly the means you're talking about. And she is waiting for spirit, waiting for God, waiting for the daemon. At the same time, she has a very fierce, unflagging, and implacable critique of church structures as ideological state apparatus, of ideological apparatuses. She actually has a theory of history where she blames the Catholic Church and the Inquisition for the creation of for being the first political parties, and according to her, the Catholic Church and the Inquisition, actually in the massacre of the Albigensians, even before that, in the 12th century, I believe. Um, in those instances, the Catholic Church became the first modern, in our sense, uh, political party. And they became a modern political party because they turned, according to Weil, the church turns um, its doctrines and its beliefs into an ideology when it insists and into propaganda, when it insists on enforcing the individual to believe by means of violence or by means of propaganda.
See,
You don't even have to get to the violence,
that
right?
was my question. Like we've talked a bit about what sort of the preconditions for truth are, right? And these are this idea of the perfection, right? Of God, of solitude, of individual, of peace, is I think it's worth talking for a second about what the sort of hallmarks or preconditions of these ideological apparatuses are. And is it just that they are sort of instruments of control? Is that what it is? Something that would direct you and necessarily steer you away from the divine because it's human led and we are necessarily flawed.
And because you can't empty yourself out, right?
Right. They
There
fill you.
is, yeah, they feel you. That's the answer. Or Michael, more insidious to Vey, and she talks about this. You let them fill you rather than thinking, rather than consulting individual thought or reason, which he also believes in, you just think about what the party says or what the church says, and therefore you shut down.
So
And you say,
essentially,
yeah,
no, this is fascinating. So then essentially it is the filling of the soul, the spirit, the being, the whatever, right? With things that are external to us, that are not of this perfect source, that create the problem. You know, in a weird way, to sort of move us away from religion for a second, this isn't totally different than Stiegler saying we have to step outside
absolutely,
and be bored, right?
Right.
I mean, that's the same argument that we're just
and Byung-Chul Han too.
Yes.
And by the way, when you mentioned our previous Bay episode, it wasn't surprising that we steered to Stiegler almost immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Michael, I think that would be a perfect time or place to stop for now. But I see in my little notebook here that there are at least 2 other passages that we wanted to talk about in order to fully cover this essay. But maybe this will hopefully serve as a preamble or a prologue to our to another episode.
Yeah, I think
this particular essay.
I think this is probably to not make this too difficult to I think to go any further creates a longer discussion than is probably ideal for one listening. So let's finish up with the second part of this next time. But I will tell you, Barry, I'm still full of beans. I really enjoyed this discussion.
Good.
And I look forward to picking this up again next time.
And I don't think it would be bad to share to our listeners something that we were thinking about just a moment ago, which is perhaps Louis Althusser is going to be in everyone's, not in everyone's future, but in the future.
But if you choose to listen, he's going to be in your future. He'll be in ours. Exactly. He'll be in ours.
He'll be in ours and maybe in yours if you decide to share your time with us. As always, thank you, Michael, and thanks, dear listener.
Thanks for listening to the Critical Media Studies podcast. To find out more about the show, check out our webpage at criticalmediastudiespodcast.com.